Welcome to the Live Courageously podcast show. I'm your host, John Duffy, and this is a very special episode of the show. Live Courageously has been the conscious theme of my life for the last 3 years since the beginning of the pandemic in 2023, and has been an unconscious theme for most of my life. Courage is resistance to fear, mastery of fear, not the absence of fear. There's something contagious about someone who is courageous. And today's special show is with two courageous people, Christopher Loverro and Anton Yaremchuk, my best pronunciation. Christopher is a graduate of the University of California, Berkeley Peace and Conflict Studies program, a retired police officer, founder of the Warriors for Peace Theater, and he brings a unique perspective shaped by his combat service in Iraq and his humanitarian efforts in the Ukraine. His commitment to using the arts as a tool for healing and peace, combined with his firsthand experience in combat conflict zones, provide a profound understanding of the human cost of war. Anton is an award-winning Ukrainian filmmaker and humanitarian, and together with Christopher, and they're both advocates for peace through the arts, and they have embarked on a significant speaking tour across California and the United States. The tour, titled Voices from the Frontline, aims to bring light to the unreported aspects of the Ukrainian conflict, focus on personal stories and the impact on local communities. Newly returned from the front lines of the Ukraine, Christopher and Anton just conducted their speaking tour in California, New York, and the National Capital Region to inform audiences about their experience over the past 2 years. These two voices from the front line have made multiple trips to provide aid and assistance to those critically affected by the war. With that, let me introduce you to my guest today, and here we go. Welcome, Christopher, and welcome, Anton. Thank you for being part of Live Courageously.
Hey, good to be here. Thank you for inviting us, John.
Thank you.
And so I'd like to, this kind of show came together at the last minute. I ran into you both at, of all places, a Romeo and Juliet play in Santa Monica. And here's a little picture of the thing for it. And with that, we kind of said, let's get the show together before you head back out of the U.S., Anton. So with that, I'd like to start out by letting both of you kind of introduce a little bit of your background to the audience. So maybe we'll start with Christopher and then go on to you, Anton. So share, I gave a little bit of your bios, but I'd like you to go a little bit deeper if you don't mind. So Christopher, it's on you.
Well, thank you for having us on the show and enabling us to keep spreading this awareness. So, as you mentioned, I'm a retired police officer and a U.S. Army combat veteran. I served in Iraq attached to the 2nd Infantry Division. And fast forward to February 2022, like everybody else, I was watching this war unfold on TV, and two things became apparent to me. The first was that this is becoming a war of genocide. And the second thing that I realized is that the Ukrainians were going to be fighting this war alone. So like a lot of U.S. military veterans, we did a self-assessment and figured out if we could be of use because of our skill set. And I linked up with another Iraq war veteran who I served with, Juan Rodriguez, who had just come back from the region. He was helping provide safe passage to the millions of people coming across the Polish border. And so we linked up and we went and we just started networking, and we started just being a part of many, many different groups. During the initial phases of the war, people just kind of spontaneously created organizations. Civil society just sort of stood itself up to assist. And so I worked with different organizations providing medical relief, humanitarian aid, food aid, and we assisted Base UA, which is the organization that Anton founded, to evacuate people out of the town of Bakhmut and the surrounding areas. And we just kept this relationship going. I have been back and forth 4 times. And now that I'm back home, I'm trying to find ways to be useful. And we just kind of put our heads together and realized that the best way we could help right now is to take a time out from working in Ukraine and go on this national speaking tour to help people understand what's really going on in Ukraine, the severity of the situation, and how important it is for the United States to stay in the fight and continue to assist Ukraine and until victory, as we like to say.
There's a lot of stuff to dive deeper into that, especially on your tour and what you've done so far with the tour. But before we go into that, Christopher, Anton, give us a little bit of your background as a filmmaker and what led you to go into the Ukraine during the war and starting up that organization that Christopher mentioned. So give us a little bit of that journey.
I am Ukrainian, and I was on Maidan, so where the revolution happened in 2014. And basically since then, as obviously many other people in the country, I was looking for ways of both participating in these waves of, democratic search and search for a new modern identity that was trying to distance itself from the Soviet past and from the post-Soviet structures that kind of came to be in the 90s, that very much both influenced everything happening in the country and are also the basis for the invasion and the war itself. So from 2014, as a filmmaker, I've done several feature documentary projects, all connected one way or another to the historical events, be it, a film about a soldier, a guy who joined one of the volunteer battalions right after Maidan, basically went there straight from Maidan. And he was very much, representative for these events and for this new generation of people that was ready to actually fight for this new identity. We've done a documentary film about also activists and journalists that, turned politicians on this wave after Maidan and came into parliament. And that gave me an opportunity also to really observe how politics have changed, what hasn't changed, what politics does to people. So it was also a very interesting way of interpreting what was happening around. And we've done a documentary about Maidan trial procedures, about the few cops that got actually arrested. Also, obviously, many more were involved, and they fled to Crimea or to Russia. So I was basically, for all the years leading to this full-scale invasion, I was very much involved in everything happening in Ukraine, very close to those topics, to those happenings, and I was trying to do something meaningful with what I back then thought I could do best, which is, making films. That's my profession and my calling. But once this full-scale invasion happened, I think, there's nothing extraordinary or unique. So many people went through the same path where at some point it was clear to them that, documenting this or helping out occasionally is not enough, especially once the war came to the scale that we see right now. So, I just very spontaneously felt the urge to get involved practically, physically, starting helping, and then it all just developed very organically, and you just kind of, it just becomes your life. And at some point you realize that the war is not something temporary, but this is what's going to kind of define, unfortunately or fortunately, I don't know, but it will define obviously my life path. And these years will be the years that, one way or another will definitely have changed everything in my life. So.
Well, I'd like to kind of get you to tell us a little bit about what the organization you built, Base UA, and then we'll kind of, we'll bounce around the bunch. But I wanted to read something that you posted that I saw on Facebook that I just thought would be good for people to hear. It was one of your posts, and it says, "I've been trying to grasp with this expected but still overwhelming reality since the first day of the Russian full-scale invasion, feeling helpless and not being able to control any part of the historical events unfolding around us is probably what bothers me the most. So we threw ourselves into the middle of things. And since the moment I drove from Berlin on the 25th of February, I've been trying to help wherever I could. Cause it's the only way to cope with this whole bullshit and the only way to reclaim some agency, handing out a food package so that a family definitely has something to eat for a couple of days, evacuating a mother with a small child so they have a chance or a better future, or organizing a summer camp for displaced kids so they might have the opportunity to reflect on their experience through art is what we can do to maintain some sanity in all of this." So, I mean, I think that was just a pretty powerful, straight from the heart comment that you made, and I wanted to share that. But tell us a little bit about Then you got there, and this is your experience, and then you formed Base UA. Tell us a little bit about Base UA.
So basically, you know, crossing the border on the 25th, like the crisis was just kind of everywhere. You had literally millions of people moving to the western border, mostly and predominantly women with children or very big families, people with disabilities. So definitely, you know, people that needed assistance, and the infrastructure and the overall system was completely overwhelmed and wasn't capable of moving such masses of people. So this whole evacuation thing, you know, just really came to be because the need was so overwhelming. And we started bringing people to the border, people from Kharkiv, Zaporizhia, Kyiv, obviously smaller cities as well, from frontline regions, from the south. Everybody was kind of coming to Lviv and trying to cross the border there, and we were transporting them to the border. They would walk over the border, which was much faster than waiting in a bus, or obviously even worse, in a car. And the network that I had in the European Union, because I lived for many years, half of my life I spent in Italy, in Germany, and you know, have friends in many different countries. So it was possible to mobilize that network. And on the other side of the border, we would have friends and friends of friends and people that just kind of were there to help, waiting with the car and pick up those people that we evacuated. And then they would go to Berlin, to Prague, to Polish cities where we also already had someone waiting for them. So a family that could accommodate them for a few months and support them during the bureaucratic kind of registration processes and things like that. So I guess that's, it just kind of came to be, but that's very much representative of what Base UA became as well down the road. Quality rather than quantity, you know. So I guess over the first 4 or 5 weeks where we were mostly doing this border evacuations, we probably have evacuated about 100 people, but you know, it wasn't just, you know, putting people on a bus and just dropping them somewhere. Each of them had a very specific and complicated path and support system, and we kept in touch. We made sure that these people found their ways in the new locations. So it was very much this individual case management, and that's still very true today. You know, what we do today is still based on this grassroots kind of approach. None of us are doing this as a career. None of us is, you know, making money with this. None of us is doing this out of some sense of ambition, as unfortunately does happen in certain bigger institutions. But we do this because, as most of the people in Ukraine, you know, we just mobilized facing these huge adversities, and we're just doing the best we can to at least help individual stories if we can't resolve this huge crisis overall.
Just to give you an idea of the scale, the phase that he's talking about, the initial, you know, couple months of the war, there were about 10 million internally displaced Ukrainians and 3 or 4 million fleeing across the border. So you can imagine that level of people moving. No organization can handle that scale. The UN certainly can't. No one could. So what was needed was for the Ukrainian people to just rise up and spontaneously have their civil society mobilize. And the role that foreign volunteers played was just to kind of plug in and assist in any way that we could.
Well, let me ask you about some of that, because you have a rather unique background of being in war and being in Iraq, you know, in the U.S. Army, being a police officer, and then being an artist and a creator of Warriors for Peace and an actor, and all kinds of different, using the arts as a way to heal people from trauma and finding a way to bring people together. So you have this unique background, Christopher. And then when you made that decision to go to the Ukraine to get involved in humanitarian aid and to begin to put yourself back into that, what was that experience like the first time you got over there? You had been to war before. It wasn't unique to you, but what did you experience the first time you arrived there? And how did you, what would you share about that with us?
A lot to unpack there. I mean, it was overwhelming. It was epic. I mean, you're talking about the Russian army on a rampage. One of the first missions I went on was to deliver aid to a town called Bucha. And after Bucha was liberated, the world realized that the Russian army was committing genocide against Ukrainian civilians, mass executions, tortures, mass rapes. It's indescribable, the level of savagery that was taking place against Ukrainian civilians. And so that was both heartbreaking and motivating. And then to see how the Ukrainian people, civilians, would stand up and assist the war effort in any way they can. And the idea that, you know, and you hear this talked about a lot, the idea that Ukraine should negotiate to end the war. From my perspective, having been there off and on for the last 2 years, is utterly absurd. The Ukrainians are fighting for their very existence. They're fighting for the right to live. If Ukraine loses this war, there's no more Ukraine. They will cease to exist as a sovereign, independent nation state. And the Ukrainians know this. And one of the things we're trying to get the world to realize is there's no quit. The Ukrainians don't seem to, the idea that they're going to let a foreign military power invade and destroy and savage their country, and that they're just going to be okay with it and settle, is just, it seems to be a foreign concept to them. So that was very inspiring. It was also is interesting. So I served with an infantry brigade in Mosul, Iraq for a year. I was there when the insurgency began. And my year in combat in Iraq was a walk in the park to some of the things I experienced in Ukraine. I mean, you're talking about the entire Russian military not adhering to any laws of land warfare, on a complete just genocidal rampage. MiGs flying over, tanks, infantry, special forces, all the things that we never had to deal with in Iraq, we're experiencing in Ukraine. And of course, as humanitarian workers, we're unarmed. We don't have armored vehicles. We just have flak vests and helmets, and that's it. And so it was a completely different experience serving in the Donbass region near the fighting compared to what I experienced either in Somalia or the former Yugoslavia. I volunteered there during the war. I was in Somalia during the same year as the Black Hawk Down incident. I served in Iraq. So I've been to several war zones, and this is just in a class all of its own.
Well, let me play. I mean, you've been there, Ukraine 4 times now, I believe. Is that correct?
Right.
And, you know, one of the times you were there bringing aid, and you belong to the American Legion Post 43 in Hollywood, which I'm also a member of. And you did a little video because you were trying to get people to support what you were doing over there. So I'm going to play that for a second, for a few minutes, so people can see that and give a little bit of behind the scenes. So give me a second, and I'm going to throw that up.
Christopher Loverro, and I just wanted to give a shout out to my brothers and sisters back home in the veterans community, especially Post 43, American Legion, and VME. Thank you, everyone who has donated, who has prayed for me, who has supported me to help the mission over here. It doesn't go unnoticed. God bless you. I just want you to know I really appreciate all of you and love you, and I'll be home soon. Slava Ukraini.
And that was one of the, I'm not sure what time you were over there when you did that message from the Ukraine.
Yeah, that was last winter.
Last winter.
And yeah, I think that was near Chasiv Yar. Yeah.
Well, there's a lot to, you know, unpack on this. You know, I guess, you know, we'll go forward, then we'll go backwards. But maybe, you know, just recently you put together this tour of the United States, obviously California. You went to other cities together with Anton, and the purpose of that tour. So why don't we talk a little bit of that, where you've been. And I know you're about to do another event at American Legion Post 43 tomorrow night to spread that word to the Post. But share a little bit about why you put the tour together. What was the purpose of the tour, the educational of that? What were you trying to accomplish, and what did you accomplish? And share that with us as well.
Sure, I'll speak for a moment, Manny. So, going back to how could I be the most useful? I've been there 4 times. And as Anton talks a lot about, there's different phases of the war that require different needs to be addressed. Some are short-term, some are long-term. The evacuation phase of, the emergency of getting people out of areas of fighting, that phase is mostly gone. Delivering emergency aid, that was the beginning phase. Now it's more addressing these long-term needs, rehousing people. If you evacuate people from a area of active combat, where do they go? How do the kids go to school? Do they have medical aid? So, there's all these things that are needed. But in the end, the United States and our aid and support are extremely critical, because without it, it's very hard to see a path for a successful outcome for Ukraine. And so because of the internal politics that's kind of ripping our country apart right now, Congress is sitting on our, certain elements of Congress are preventing this aid package from getting passed. So we put our heads together and came up with the idea of just having him come out here and just raise awareness, just get in front of media outlets, get in front of different organizations. We started our trip day 2 of being in the United States. We were being interviewed at the United Nations in New York. Then I went to the Pentagon, and then we went to Capitol Hill, and we met with Senator Moran's office. We met with Congressman Thompson, and we've just been making the rounds to try and get the word out and emphasize that the war in Ukraine is not just a war between Ukraine and Russia. It's a war between good and evil. It's a war between democracies and dictatorships. It's a war for what kind of world we want to live in. I would say that it's actually a civilizational struggle. And the Ukrainians are fighting this war for all the democracies of the world. All they're asking for is for us to support them. They're not asking for American boots on the ground. They've made that very clear. So we see our job right now is just to provide this counter narrative to what a lot of people are being fed in certain media outlets, and help them understand that this is very much not just in our own interest, but the interest of the rest of the world. So we've been going like gangbusters for about a month, and we're going to continue to get the word out until he leaves in a couple days.
So Anton, maybe tell us a little bit. I mean, what's kind of unique about both of you, and speaking on what your effort was with this particular tour, both of you are different aspects of being in the arts. Obviously, you're a filmmaker, you've been a filmmaker. And, besides going over to the Ukraine and building this organization, humanitarian effort, you also come from the arts, as does Christopher, different versions of the arts. So doing the tour and reaching out and trying to reach people in the arts and in the media and other communities, what has your experience been like as you've gone on this tour with Christopher this last couple of weeks?
Well, it's been overwhelmingly positive in general. It's my first time in the States, and I'm, very much impressed. And obviously we've been to these extremely interesting and fascinating locations. We spent a few days in New York and Washington and in California. We've been to San Francisco, Napa Valley, Los Angeles, and so it's a really broad experience, especially, for my first visit to the country. And everyone was just very welcoming, very supportive. Obviously, it's a bit of a echo chamber, because when people come, they usually are supportive for the starters. But still, I think it was very important, because I think even those people that are interested in the topic, they might still kind of perceive it in either this. And sometimes it's really about giving them the more detailed context, because sometimes people also might have like an exaggerated perception of things, and I think it's also important to bring those things down. Like we also try not to over dramatize and not to put everything in a very schematic kind of perception, but really deliver this reporting of what's happening on the ground right now. What are the needs, how this whole thing is developing and becoming a long-term crisis, but also kind of a situation that presents certain challenges, and we have to deal with them in a more structured, more complicated way. We focus much more now on this work with children, and I think for many people that we were meeting, it wasn't clear how many children remain in these frontline areas, and that Ukraine is now presents very different environments. They're all connected to the war. They're all very much impacted by the war. But obviously, being in Kramatorsk or being in Kyiv or being in Lviv, those are three different realities because it's a huge country. And I think for the people, it's also important to understand those details and those differences, because then they also understand better the needs. And that was basically our main goal. I think most of the people were, as I said, overwhelmingly welcoming, but it gives us the opportunity to also just maintain that topic alive, because whoever comes to an event of ours then goes back home and talks to someone who wasn't at that event, and those people potentially will talk about Ukraine the next day again, or they will be more focused on the news they'll see on Twitter or on Facebook or on television. I think it's also about creating these multiplier forces, and the more people talk about it, the better, and the higher the chances that also people that need to hear it will actually hear it. So I guess that's kind of how we see all of this. And as I said, the experience was overwhelmingly positive. I'm just extremely grateful for obviously Christopher organizing all of this, and everyone from his network who was very supportive. So we don't take this for granted. Ukraine is very, very, very thankful and grateful for everything the American, both people and the state and generally all this overwhelming support is very appreciated. And we don't say you have to give this to us. We're just telling you, if you don't, then many, many more will die than it should be.
And let me just jump before you go further with that, Christopher. And you can go back to your point, but there's points that you wanted to, as part of your journey here, to raise deeper awareness on, and some of those points are in your flyer: children and youth, internally displaced people, some of the waste of resources in the humanitarian section, the Ukrainian military performance. Those are some of the topics that you wanted to get in and expand people's knowledge of. So Christopher, take back to what you were about to do, and then both of you can kind of go into those areas that you've been wanting to speak on as you do continue to tour.
Yeah, I just want to emphasize a point and clear something up. Anton briefly spoke to it. The idea that, so again, I've been going there off and on for 2 years. I've been working on the ground. I've worked with a couple dozen different organizations. And there is a theme throughout I've observed, and that is the Ukrainians are not only grateful for the help they're getting from the outside world, but there's a sense that they don't expect anyone to help Ukraine at the expense of anybody else. So over the last couple of years, there's been a lot of things going on throughout the world. There were the floods in Pakistan, the earthquakes in Syria and Turkey, famine in Somalia. So there were pretty epic conflicts and disasters going on throughout the world over the last couple of years. And every time we caught that on the news over there, the Ukrainians were always, oh my God, how can we help them? In fact, I think the Ukrainians even sent a search and rescue team to help find people and rescue people in Turkey after the earthquake happened. So it's not a zero-sum game. The attitude in Ukraine, at least my experience, both with the volunteers and with the Ukrainians, is by all means, if there's another emergency situation somewhere in the world, if you can help those people, you should. They're never asking for any type of assistance or help at the expense of anybody else. And I just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, I get that. And then do you want to, either one of you or both of you, go into any of those points that you've been addressing in your tour, those 4 points that I raised, if that makes sense for you to do now?
I can briefly just give you an overview. So obviously the children, the teenagers, the underage generations that are remaining along the front lines in Donetsk region, where we are based, 33,000 underage kids are currently living. All of them have no access to normal schooling, so it's all happening online, if at all, because, you know, stable internet is an issue, enough infrastructure pieces is an issue. If you have a family of 4 or 5 kids, highly unlikely that they all have a laptop, and you know, a possibility of individually take classes online. So this obviously brings social isolation. Many of their friends have evacuated, so also these friendship and kind of support environments have broken down. So you have thousands and thousands only in the Donetsk region of kids that are isolated and that have zero access to a platform where they can experience relationships, conflict, get exposed to things that, you know, they might be interested in, and that might spark a passion that can transform into a profession. And all of these basic but also, you know, extremely essential things are just not happening. And I do think that it's very much underreported, that it's not just about giving them food and shelter and saving them from the shelling. The problems that come with a long-term war are much more complicated and complex to solve. The same goes for the huge crisis with internally displaced population. Around 6.5 million people currently displaced, and most of them, the total majority, is in some kind of temporary solution, either in shelters that are provided by humanitarian organizations or government, or they're staying with some friends, or they had some savings so they could rent an apartment. But all of that is extremely precarious, and they are all in a situation from which is very difficult to back on your feet, be reintegrated and find long-term solutions. So that's an issue that's basically like a time bomb, you know, and I think it's also unclear to people that, for example, the bare social kind of welfare structure that is currently maintained in Ukraine at the level of pre-invasion kind of status, it is absolutely funded by the Western money. So this money that, for example, is not coming from the US is also influencing very directly, extremely directly, the humanitarian situation, because Ukraine is completely broke. Our economy contracted by 30% in 2022, and it continues obviously contracting. So we're fighting a war at 2 fronts. You know, you have to, on one hand, fight the second biggest military with all their flaws and with all the mistakes they have done. It is a remarkable military power that has adapted extremely well to the new challenges that they have been facing on the battle. And, you know, 2 years into this war, from a country that had very rudimentary drone capabilities, they have now all different kind of drones, and they have more drones than we do. And they are using FPV drones to target individual soldiers. And you know, they very much adapted. So we're fighting this war on both ends, on both fronts, because we need to survive somehow economically, but also fight this war that requires immense resources that we don't have. So everything we have goes to the war effort, and the social system and the support for internally displaced people, it's mostly financed by, you know, either debt or direct support that comes from outside of the country. Huge issue. Nobody knows how to deal with it. And while the war is going on, nobody's even capable of dealing with it, you know. And then obviously the war efforts themselves, I think it's you know, the Russians were losing also the battle of narratives at the onset of the invasion, but they very much came back, and they came back very strong, and Russian narratives are dominating again. And you know, they're very good at that. And nobody talks about the fact that Ukraine, a country without a navy, literally without a navy, has taken out 1/3 of all ships that Russia had stationed in the Black Sea. You know, so we're a country without a navy is inflicting major damage on a country with a huge navy, a country that has basically, you know, yeah, I mean, now it's slightly better, but virtually has no air force. is also in the counteroffensive that happened during the summer, which, yes, did not bring obviously the results that everybody would like, but nobody was even really expecting, considering that we didn't have more men. We didn't have more artillery power, and we didn't have air superiority. We just didn't have any air capabilities. Forget about the superiority, and we still moved, and we still inflicted massive damage. Tell me, show me in the history of the military which army attacking an army that was at least as powerful in terms of the man count, or even maybe more powerful, during the attack was inflicting more damage than the other way around. That's just unheard of. Defense people, like the army that is defending, is always losing less men than the army that is attacking, and in Ukraine is the opposite. So all these things, are extremely important, and the whole thing is so complex and so unusual in many aspects that it's difficult to put it in the schematic boxes that the media obviously also kind of have to work with when they're working with slogans and very simple truths and dynamics. So these are the kind of things that we're trying to talk about, and just trying to make people aware. You don't have to hear to our versions or truths, but just you have to understand that it's much more complex than you hear, in the daily debate. And please do inform yourself. Please maintain this topic alive, because it's essential not just for Ukraine, but for the world war order that came to be after World War II.
Well, it's clearly much more complex than most of us know, and I think you explaining that some of that complexities on all the different layers, I think, is real important. I mean, one of the things, I don't know if you know, or for the audience too, what is the scope of the losses, both deaths and injured in the Ukraine during this period of war? Is there, obviously no one knows exactly those numbers, but it's significant, right? And so
it's absolutely harrowing. Unfortunately, I would say, casualties, it's obviously very hard to estimate. Mm-hmm. There are several organizations, international, and there are Russian opposition media and organizations that are obviously in exile. There are international journalistic conglomerates that are working on this, and there are different models how they're calculating losses in Russia, for example. And there are, I'm not going to go into it, but they're quite complex, but also quite brilliant algorithms that give you pretty good estimates. And we are, we're talking well over 100,000 on the Russian side. I have no idea, based on what I have read, heard, and kind of discovered and research, I would say that unfortunately the Ukrainian losses are not far from the Russian ones. I would definitely be very surprised if these ratios of 1 to 10, 1 to 5, whatever, that of course we have had in specific battles, but overall I think we're also talking about huge numbers. The official number coming from the government that Zelensky announced actually just a couple of weeks ago was 31,000 dead on the Ukrainian side. I would say easily double, triple that, because obviously he's saying about confirmed deaths, so those that are 100% verified, but you can imagine the amount of people that have been not found, considering the type of the battle and the heavy artillery shelling, and the fact that there are just simply certain parts of the battlefields that are kind of no man's land, and so not recovered bodies, easily double, triple. So yeah, figures are harrowing.
Well, the other thing that relates to this is the number of civilian casualties, and how do you even wrap your head around that? Because these territories that are being occupied, there's just no way we can know. I mean, the estimates of the number of civilians that died in Mariupol are in the thousands. I've even heard tens of thousands. And then there's
easily tens of thousands.
Easily tens of thousands just in Mariupol that may have perished. So, if you're trying to come up with numbers. I just don't know how you do it when you can't even have access to the lives lost in the occupied territories. And then there's the other issue of children that have been abducted and taken into Russia. And I think that's actually the reason that there is an international arrest warrant out for Putin. I don't know if you can speak to that, but there's those numbers. Those numbers are all over the place. I've heard over 1 million kids. I've heard tens of thousands. I mean, we just don't know.
I would say we can say about 20,000, 30,000 kids have been definitely kidnapped for all purposes.
That's probably a conservative figure.
Yeah, we can talk about more, but we're talking about huge numbers of kids that have been literally just abducted and brought to Russia.
Well, all the numbers, you know, obviously, all what you're saying, you can't tell in the middle of all this, but they're huge numbers. They're harrowing numbers. It's just beyond the scope of imagination from people who are not, aware or being involved in any of that.
But I think it's also, it still is kind of showing also for how, it is like in certain areas, at least, very kind of formidable sides that are fighting against each other, and in a certain way with very similar capabilities. Because, if we talk about Syria, for example, we have over 500,000 civilians that died in Syria. So a number that is definitely much bigger than in Ukraine, because they're, Russian, and obviously all those deaths are massively, and the majority of them have to be attributed to Russian involvement. And their bombardments, obviously, because the mass casualties happened during these bombardment campaigns where Russia just razed these cities to the ground. And in Ukraine, they can't do this. And obviously that is also because once we exhausted the Soviet air defense system, the American, the German, the other air defense systems came into the country to defend the cities. So we also have to understand how important that support is, because if we didn't have that, then we would definitely have numbers that would be much higher, because obviously these big cities are densely populated, and they could have just bombarded them and razed parts of them to the ground, as they also tried to do at the beginning with Kharkiv, for example. So I think that's also important to understand that, specific infrastructure and support really gives you an opportunity to influence the war and at least the losses. And on the other hand, yes, these figures are still absolutely harrowing, but I think the scale of the war manifests itself in the destruction of the infrastructure, of the buildings and of the cities. Because there, in a certain way, we managed to maybe protect better the people, also through evacuation and the fact that you would have safe havens that you, for example, might not have in a country like Syria. So moving from one city to another didn't really help you. But along the front line, the destruction is absolutely unimaginable. Cities razed to the ground.
You said something about, so the Russians are largely responsible for 500,000 civilians killed in Syria. And that's has a lot to do with the fact that they just didn't have air defense. Can you imagine if Ukraine didn't have Western supplied air defense systems, how many civilians would be dead by now? Because for the last 2 years, they have been bombarding the capital, Kyiv, regularly. Do you have an estimate of how many missiles and rockets have been fired at Kyiv?
Endless amounts every couple of weeks.
Tens of thousands. The amount of artillery that the Russians have used in the last 2 years, I think, is what, 30 million?
I don't know the exact estimate, but absolutely
1.5 million a month.
Yeah, incredible.
So,
at certain points, yes, they had, when the fighting was very intense, they would use over 1 million shells a month. Obviously, that's not like a constant for 24 months, but whenever, the very fierce fighting happens, the number of like just explosive material that comes from that side is absolutely incredible.
Well, I'd like to do two things. I'd like to pivot a little bit for a moment and then come back to this to finish it up. But I'd like to pivot, if we could, to something that, Christopher's mission and what he's done, being in the military, being a warrior, you've decided, you went on a journey to create something called, the Warriors, your theater company. And I just blanked on the name of it. You'll tell me what it is.
Warriors for Peace Theater.
Yes, Warriors. That's what I thought. Warriors for Peace Theater. And, you went on that, which is an attempt to do a bunch of different things. And I wanted to kind of give you a moment to share a little bit about that. Because one was to address healing and dealing with the trauma that people in the military and others have experienced, between war and other areas. So you created this Warriors for Peace Theater to help deal with PTSD and other forms of trauma, and also to bring healing to people, and also find a way to get people to overcome the differences that exist, which is clearly a challenging thing, because everybody has difference of opinions on everything, including war in general. But the goal is you're trying to bring people together for peace in a world that war keeps spreading. So tell us a little bit about your vision, your mission, why you created Warriors for Peace, and obviously your love of the arts, and your feeling that the arts is so powerful as a form to be able to do some of this. So if you could share that, and then we'll pivot back to close out, at the end of what's going on in the future with what you guys are doing with the Ukraine stuff.
Yeah, well, let's start with our log line, which is art transcends politics and brings people together. I believe that art is what reminds us that we're all human, and that it's the common denominator for humanity. So when I started doing theater at the College of Marin in Northern California, one of my teammates, one of my castmates let me know that there were a group of Iraqis that were being sponsored to come to Oregon to participate in the Oregon Shakespeare Festival. And I thought, wow, what an opportunity. What if we got a bunch of Iraq war veterans like myself together with the Iraqis, and we did a Shakespeare production together as a means of bringing our communities together to promote peace through the arts, to share the stage together. And everybody was kind of all for the idea, but there wasn't the means or the time or the money to do it. So I decided, well, why don't I just form my own theater company? And the mission would be to use the arts to bring communities together and to promote healing within the veterans community and without. So we're an LA-based 501c3 theater company, and we basically use the arts, the theater arts mostly, as a means of catharsis, as a means of healing. And through my own personal journey, I have found that, as a returning veteran who suffered from PTSD for many years and was even suicidal at one point, the arts are what brought me back from the brink, and the arts are where I found the most healing and catharsis. So we've been doing that ever since. And, our broader mission is to not just use the arts to help people heal and to bring communities together, but to promote diversity in the arts, to empower women in the arts, to bring communities together. So we have different projects and workshops and classes and productions, all within the vein of using art to bring people together and help them heal.
And here's a picture of you. I just got to share. I think that's just a great one. But you obviously, what's that?
That's from a movie called Love Hurts.
Love Hurts. Yeah. And here was the other picture of you working on the movie, right? But yeah. The creative side of doing that and doing Shakespeare, and I know they're doing a documentary about what you're doing with bringing civilians and the military veterans together, and I know they're going to be doing a documentary about it. How have you found that helpful? How helpful has that been? I guess my question is, I know you've also done dance, and you've been involved with a dance troupe of veterans that also got involved in the arts. So how useful has that been to people going through trauma to be able to kind of come out and get through it together and get that kind of hope and support to build that resilience back?
Yeah, so there's a dance company here in LA called Diavolo, Architecture in Motion. The founder and artistic director is Jacques Heim. And for the last 6 years, he's been doing a program where they train veterans to dance, and it culminates in a performance piece. In fact, we even performed at the Kennedy Center in DC. And I think the best example I can give you of how the arts help people heal is, I remember the first time I was working with them, we were in rehearsal, and I had a moment where I realized for the first time in 10 years since returning from war, I had felt truly at peace. And I mean, how do you know, how do you put a price on that? Like, how do you, I mean, to go from a veteran who almost committed suicide to feeling completely at one and at peace with myself and the universe is a pretty powerful testimony to the power of the arts. And so that has just kind of motivated me even more. And so now I even include dance in my company's theater productions. And we now collaborate with dancers and actors to produce these shows.
Well, the other night I got to see your performance of Romeo and Juliet with dance involved at the West Side Ballet Company, and it had that in it. And it was a very powerful performance. I mean, it was, I'm not, I've acted, but Shakespeare is a challenge. But watching the performance, it was, and then the conversation after the performance that you had with both veterans as well as civilians, it was just a very powerful conversation of what you're saying that you're doing to, bring those communities together and to bring healing and to bring communication. So, I got to see it in person, which is why we're doing this podcast today. But feel free to add to that.
Yeah, I would like to talk about the collaboration that we do with civilians. I mean, most of what we do, even though I'm a veteran, this is a veteran-founded 501c3, most of what we do is a collaboration with civilians, because we have found that there's a magic that happens when you bring these two communities together, because everybody has trauma, right? Everybody, not just veterans. And so we help the civilians heal, they help us heal. And I think that if we did something that was only for veterans, we would really be missing out in that component that helps both communities. It also has the added benefit of narrowing the civil military divide.
And given that there's such a small amount of, at least in the United States, small amount of people who participate in the military, that divide is gotten bigger, obviously. And so a lot of people don't have any, on the civilian side, don't have a lot of contact with military people. So by doing that, it just creates a education for the civilian side to really get a better understanding of the military side. Just like, listening to this today and listen to what you share from your experiences over in the Ukraine, I think for people who've never been in war, people who've never been in that situation, it just educates people on a deeper level, like you said, to the complexities, Anton, of this situation. Because, a lot of times people's understanding is very simplistic if you're not in the middle of it and don't have the experience, or you don't get to talk to the people who are really living through it and experiencing it. You tend to have a very simplistic understanding of the realities. And I think what you're doing is bringing an awareness to the complexities and all the layers and levels.
And I think the problem is that today we kind of live in a society where you can't say, oh, I don't know enough. I don't have a position on that. I have to be, more educated before I express something. Everyone is kind of pushed towards embracing one side or the other, being extremely, biased and just kind of embracing these narratives in packages. And I think that's the issue. Like, it's fine. It's clear that you can't be an expert on everything. And I think that's also a huge problem, that in today's world, actual experts have been so very much devalued and they lost in authority, and I think that's very dangerous, because, we need that. It is impossible for everyone to be very well informed and versed in every topic and every political or historical issue. So it's also about just like, as you said, as I already said, is trying to make people understand that things are more complicated than they might seem. And so before you act, ask yourself twice, like, are you really informed? Are you really doing something that you decided, or you're just embracing some kind of position that, has been pushed on you through your environment, through your habitat, and kind of, social status and so on and so forth. So.
Well, when I started this podcast a couple of years ago, Live Courageously, I mean, courage can be defined many different ways, and obviously there's many forms of courage. But, I think one form of courage, in my opinion, is to have the courage to be willing to have respectful conversations with people who have different opinions than you, to not be afraid to do that, as long as you come from a place of respect and saying, well, what can I learn from this person? Because they have experiences different than me. Now, we may disagree on this perspective or that perspective, but if you're a good person, why wouldn't I want to learn why you have that perspective, what your experiences have been, so I can grow and learn and maybe change my opinions on certain things, or maybe not. It all, but at least if you're willing to, and that's, I think, one of the things that why I appreciate what Christopher's attitude is trying to encourage people to have those kind of communications between each other and do it with respect and do it with, like, I don't know, you said we can't know everything. We don't know everything. And we know what our limited experiences are. So why not have conversations with people who have a different experience and try to learn from them and do it respectfully? So that's one of the reasons I do the show the way I do. And of course, I have strong opinions, but it isn't about me trying to convince you on my opinion. It's about, let's have a conversation and let me learn.
I think, and especially here in the United States, so many of us have lost the ability to listen to an opinion or a perspective or a conclusion that's completely different and be okay with that, and not then demonize the person for thinking differently. I really think it's kind of ripping our society apart. We're so partisan to the point where we're tribal, and we're all human. We all do it. We all get sucked into political debates. But I think if we can just challenge ourselves to listen to someone and not always just being, rather than waiting till they stop talking so you can respond to convince them that they're wrong, why not just listen and understand that, okay, that's a different perspective. And let me hear where you're coming from. How did you draw that conclusion? You're a smart person. You look at this and you have a completely different take on it. I want to know why. And I'm not going to try and convince you that you're wrong. I'm going to respect that you just simply think differently than I do. And that's okay. We've lost that here.
I couldn't agree more. We have lost it. And, there's two different things that I, have heard said, and I agree. One is, we've been given 2 ears and 1 mouth. So we should probably try to listen twice as much as we talk, which is, I love that. Like, unfortunately doesn't happen too much. And the other thing is, somebody else said, once, listen first to understand. So like you said, Christopher, don't listen to wait till the person finishes so you can throw your point in, but actually listen to understand and listen to who that person is and why they feel the way they feel, why they believe what they believe, and if you listen to understand, then you're going to get a relationship, or a better relationship with people, as opposed to just having a relationship with people who are clones of yourself with the same exact opinions. And
that would be a pretty boring life. That would be a pretty boring life.
Absolutely, 100%. And some people, I think, unfortunately, have deviated towards the boring life as opposed to the exciting life of having these respectful conversations with people of different opinions. So I would like to kind of, close out with, and thank you for all you've shared so far, but I'd like to kind of close out with going forward, what's the next steps for Veterans for Peace? What's the next steps for you, Anton? What's the next steps for, obviously the tour ends with this version of the tour ends when you leave from the States, but you'll be doing it tomorrow at American Legion Post 43. But what's the next steps for you, for both of you going forward and using your skills, your talents to continue to do what you do?
I'm going back to Ukraine and I will continue working there. This has been, a long planned and finally realized first real step of the long-term kind of, process of building up this international transatlantic network and community of people that support this cause, both in terms of alleviating the humanitarian crisis at the moment, rebuilding the country, also not just to kind of superficially, rebuild the buildings, but actually not even rebuild, but build an identity for a modern Ukraine that hopefully will not be just signed and decided by this war, but will be able to find something much more substantial, and the war will just be, part of it, and maybe a catharsis for the realization of what we are actually capable of and what are our long-term perspectives. So yeah, the journey continues. It's all kind of been developing very organically and naturally. And, the more time you kind of stick to it, the bigger and the deeper are the results, the capabilities, the resources. So yeah, that is my life now. And, everything I do is one way or another connected to the war, and I think it will continue to be so. And obviously, me and Chris will maintain close collaboration and coordination. And he's basically, kind of base UA American kind of coordinator, let's say. And so, this is just the beginning of hopefully. At some point, a very sustainable and strong and kind of honest community of people that are as trying to be courageous.
Let me also add to that. So one of the things that we're going to be doing going forward is producing content, video content, to basically create a counter narrative to some of the propagandized information that's being pumped out via the Kremlin or by the Kremlin via certain American news outlets. So, topics such as, you hear people say that Ukraine was always just a part of Russia, that this is a regional conflict. It's, we shouldn't be investing so much of our money in it. Like all these things that we hear about discussed. We need to offer another perspective to that, to counter it, and provide the ground truth that we have from having been over there.
Well, thank you both. Thank you for coming on the show. Thank you for the conversation. Thank you for your communication. I've definitely learned a lot more from listening to both of you than I knew before I got on this podcast with you. And I just think, with all of it is, we just gotta, be willing to learn and be willing to, and we may have difference of opinions on all of this, but at the end of the day, I think we just got to be open to each other and realize that, you're out there doing good for people. And so, once again, thank you so much. Wish you both the best. And if you have anything else you want to close with, otherwise, have a great night tomorrow night. And obviously we'll be in touch, Christopher.
Yeah, I guess we'll just plug the American Legion Post 43 tomorrow, which is Thursday, March 28th at 7:30 p.m. It's open to the public. It's free. And we're going to be doing more of this. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you for inviting us. It was great talking to you. Thank you, John, for putting the website, basea.org. You can go there and find much more about our work. And, there's a lot of visual material. So it will help you understand also better in what kind of environment we operate. Just stay informed, stay curious, and stay courageous.
Well, I love all those, and yes, 100%, Anton. Well, thank you. God bless both of you, and best, and we'll connect in the future. Thank you.
God bless.
Thank you, Jim. Bye-bye.